the problems we're talking about transparency and scale and diversity and all these things. When you get big, even a good corporation is only so good by the nature of how it has to operate at that scale. My first book, I used a very simple metaphor of saying it's like putting biodiesel in a bulldozer, but not preventing the subdivision. It's like, okay, we got bulldozers. Do you want them running on leaded fuel, or do you want them running on biofuel? Well, we want them running on biofuel, but it'd be better if we weren't doing the subdivision. So there's a level of purity and idealism and activism where you just have to kind of decide where you're going to go in, and what you think might be possible.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish soil-grown crops and pasture-raised livestock under the organic seal. You just heard from Tasch. He's the founder of Slow Money, and he's talking about the kind of absurd and ineffectual decision-making that corporations face once they get really big. Today, my conversation with Woody is all about small farms and the community grassroots investing initiatives that can help support them. So let's dive in. I'm really thrilled today to be speaking with Tasch. He's a true local food movement inspirational leader to many, myself included. Hi, Woody. It's great to see you.
Hey, Linley.
So you're the author of Inquiries into the Nature of Slow Money, Investing as if Food, Farms, and Fertility Mattered. That's published by Chelsea Green.
Yep.
And also Soil, Notes Toward the Theory of Practice of Nurture Capital. And you're writing right now, right? Tell me about your latest project.
Well, I'm almost kind of done. Meaning, as you know, we distributed 6 free online installments over the last 2 or 3 months. The last installment of the main body of the book, the last installment went out several days ago. And then now we're pausing through the election. This is being recorded about a month before the election. And for kind of all kinds of spiritual, emotional, and psychological reasons, I'm pausing to put the last part out until about a month after the election. Hopefully by then the dust will have settled. So the last part is the epilogue, but it is important because it's the part that's really going to look forward to the next decade. I mean, the book itself does, but in the epilogue, I will make a call to action. So this third book is for me. Hopefully some of the people watching this know about one of the other books or have heard about Slow Money or whatever, but for those who haven't, the first book was written about 10 years ago. The Slow Money movement started kind of bubbling up. Hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that. You'll be my guide here. Then 3 years ago, I wrote a book called Soil, Notes Towards the Theory and Practice of Nurture Capital. And that was kind of my, I would describe that a little bit as my primal scream in the face. It starts off by saying, if it's true that we are what we eat, may it also be true that we're not what we tweet. So, it was very, I was kind of freaked out. What can I say? And so for me, it was it has poetry and photography. It was just a very deep personal expression of kind of the way I wish we were all thinking and talking and whatever. And this one, sorry to go into all that detail, but this one is kind of like the Goldilocks of the other two. It kind of brings together, this is how I think about it. We'll see how the world thinks about it. But it has some art to it, but it's really a kind of a synthesis of all the Slow Money discussions that it has been my privilege to participate in over this last decade, because I really think we're trying to, not trying, we are throwing some seeds out, into the soil. There's no reason not to use that metaphor. A new way of kind of thinking and acting with our own money at the local level. And I'd say this is what's characterized what we've been doing from day one. It's all about action. So it's about the intention that will get us to really act differently. And fortunately or unfortunately, when you add the intention part, that's a kind of a big thing. Like, why do we do what we do? How do we deal with our own money? Why would we rather, buy Alibaba stock at 2 a.m. in the morning than make a loan to a farmer down the street? Like, what are those mental constructs that are stopping us all from doing what we sort of know we want to do, but it's still hard to get ourselves to it? So I feel like I've gone on way too long about those 3 books already, but go ahead, be my guide.
No, but we don't even know what the third one's called. Tell everybody why you named it Aha.
Hey, good work. Come on. So the third book is called Aha! Exclamation point. Fake Trillions, Real Billions, Bitcoin, and the Great American Do-Over. And the aha is, of course, what it is, meaning aha moment. Because what we're doing is we're trying to reawaken or reimagine our own personal relationship to money that will allow us to then start funding local food systems and supporting small and mid-sized diversified organic farms. So that's a personal, because this has arisen out of a movement, out of thousands of people talking about lots of stuff and then doing something. So we're trying to affirm and, let's say, create the conditions for more of us to have that aha. And then there's a big, this is even bigger than intention. Then there's the big species level aha of that, that our sapience has got us into all this. And we need philios or philia, biophilia or philios, whichever word you want to use. We need to move into a more of a nurturing, affection, caring mode as a species if we're going to have a prayer of kind of, rebalancing things that we've knocked out of whack. So it's a really, really big aha, but then it's a lot of little ahas. And I would say I think every little organic farm is an aha. So if that doesn't sound too goofy, but you'll guide me to talk more about that.
Yeah. So did you have your own personal aha moment to get you to write that book? I'd say my first aha was about 20 years ago when I visited Italy and met all the slow food people. And I did have a kind of a very obvious, aha. I didn't call it that at the time. By the way, I just want to say, so the aha came out of a little bit of a joke in the second book. I do want to just explain this. Meaning, I said, what if there was a group called Americans for Healthy Agriculture or Agriculture for Healthy America? And it spells aha. And so then I just kind of played around with it. And then we had a couple of meetings in Boulder here where I live, and we called them aha meetings. And I saw that it was very effective because when you invite people to come in and talk about personal awakening and realizations and say, have you had an aha moment, just like you asked me, it's a very easy way to get people to start talking about things that are sometimes hard to talk about, i.e. money. Yeah.
It seems incontrovertible that we need a massive infusion of energy into the small and mid-sized diversified organic farm universe. So if there are tens of thousands now, or whatever that number is, actually no, we know it's hundreds of thousands. It just depends on how you count. If you look at the U.S., the census and whatnot, there are a bunch of categories there, about 49 acres and less, and et cetera. But let's say there's a few hundred. I'm just going to come up with a rough number. Just say there's a few 100,000 small diversified organic farms that are really at it in a hard, serious way and making a big chunk of their living from it, whatever. And we want to go from a few 100,000 to 500,000 to 1 million, let's say, which in today's world, those numbers sound completely bombastic. Like, how would that ever possibly happen with all the pressures? And I just think we need to imagine it and keep trying to do it. And I think the people who will do it are the people who live in these scores and hundreds of communities around the country who will be able to realize the direct value they get from having more of these farms in their community. So that's where we're focused. We're trying to create the conditions where a very significant number of people, and we're not anywhere near it yet, so I'm just saying my first 10 years of this, I think, has allowed us to look in a certain direction. And now with this new book and the work we'll be doing in the second 10 years, which we'll talk more about the 0% loans and Bitcoin and whatnot, we're trying to create the conditions where a much larger group of people and a much larger flow of capital can come in at the grassroots level. And that's an important thing because I just don't see a lot of impact investors wanting to play here because they're tending to want to work at the global level and at the more macro, larger scale, a little bit more of a technology bias and whatnot level.
Yeah. So what do you say to people in terms of a zero interest loan? Is your soil group the only one that does 0%? The others have been low interest, right?
Well, so right, there's a distinction here between most of what happened in the first decade of slow money. So in the first decade of slow money, about $75 million I mean, we know it's more than that, but that's what we count being conservative, of people who are in a room together under the slow money banner doing something together, So there were ripples beyond that, but about $75 million went into about 750. It's a little more than that. Small food enterprises, mostly farms, but cheesemakers and bread bakers and farm-to-table restaurants and seed companies, and anything that is working to build local food systems and bring the produce of small and mid-sized organic farms to the local market. So that's over 10 years. The first slow money investment happened in 2010, in the middle of the year. So we're almost exactly 10 years on. And the vast majority of that, to your point, virtually all of it, went as below market, very low interest, 3%, 4%, 5%. There was no. You'll see, depending on how much we get into the weeds on this, there was no one kind of slow money investment. It's just the ethos that people share that we've got to take our money, put it to work here. We want to help the farmer. The word philanthropy was never used because we were talking about investing. We were making loans. The word concessionary was never used. The word subsidy was never used. At least I never heard it. I never used them, and I never heard other people use them. It was just, let's make it happen. Let's figure it out. And these are enterprises that either couldn't get money from a bank, or if they could, it would be the same money would have cost 9%. Let's say, I'm just making a number up, instead of 4%. So that's what happened. And over the last several years, as I and a few of the other stewards of the movement were looking at this, saying, how can we make it a little more, diversity is nice, but some efficiency is also nice. And what we were doing is very inefficient, meaning lots of meetings, lots of conversations, lots of reinventing of the wheel at the local level. And I might want to say a little more about that, depending on how much of the details of the soil model you want to get into. But just to jump to the bottom line, what came out of that for me and a few of us was, let's try this. And this is called soil, slow opportunities for investing locally. And what we're doing is making 0% loans using donated capital. So you got to let the categories go a little bit in your thinking here. We're inviting people to donate in whatever they can afford, starting at $250, which from an impact investing standpoint is nothing to the average person who might be debating whether to join the CSA. $250 is not nothing, right? And I'll just tell you how it's working. And there are two places that are further along. We have 5 of these groups now, as of this taping, 4 in Colorado, 1 in Charlottesville, Virginia. And the 2 in Colorado are both up to about $500,000. They both have about 100 members. Just putting some rough numbers on it. There are time lags and a few different nits and gnats, but the donations have ranged in size from $250 to $50,000. These are individuals' donations. The reason the range is important is you get one vote no matter how much money you put in. So the person who's putting the $50,000 is sitting next to the $250 donor. They both get one vote. So that's not for everybody. And then farmers can join for $25, just because we want everybody to have to write it. We want everybody in the community to have put something in, even though we're not trying to take money from farmers, obviously. I don't think there's anything more fundamental than reconnecting people at the local level in a non-ideological, constructive way to grow healthy food. I mean, I just think there is nothing more hopeful than that. And then when you take that idea and you connect it to the actual farmers who you get to know, you see how hard they're working. And I'm just going to say, as a group of people, if I get to choose who I'm around while I'm alive, am I going to want to be around a bunch of bankers or a bunch of farmers? No offense to my banker friends. And believe it or not, I do have a few, not too many, but I do have a few. Farmers are just, my God, it's like heroic. It really is. Look, I'm talking to one right now, so don't let your head get too large from all of this. But
you and I have had great conversations about greenwashing of labels and how it seems like every label that comes out that's really good, that's grassroots, that comes from farmers or from workers getting together, it seems like it is really quickly co-opted. And so is that one of the reasons why you are working at the local face-to-face level, is because you just lose that transparency so quickly?
Yeah, that's a whole nother, there's a bunch of threads to this. And one is you entered that part of the conversation with the word transparency. I would maybe just talk about the word scale. They're obviously, you tied them together. They're tied together. So having approached this with a few decades of more general investment experience and philanthropy before focusing on slow money, I just saw, time after time after time. Some of these examples would be very, very obvious and people would know them, like Ben and Jerry's. They're just consumer companies that have become kind of iconic in this conversation. But many, many more stories never make it to that level of companies that start with very pure mission and vision. And then as they grow, they compromise, new investors come in. Look, how of the companies that you hear about that are really quote unquote successful, how many of the CEOs get to stay in there over the long haul? Very few. There are some examples that are different, but generally speaking, investors come in, they take the company over, they change the management, they create combinations of enterprises that will grow shareholder value. So as enterprises grow, their ability to stay true to the vision and the mission, and the so-called non-financial reasons for the enterprise get compromised, and the financial imperatives of the enterprise take over. And part of that is, as it grows, it becomes less transparent. So if you're a shareholder in a multinational corporation, you need third-party certification and all kinds of reports and muckraking journalism and TV talking heads interviewing people to try to figure out what the hell's really going on in there. And at a certain point, it becomes almost impossible. That's again, I make a reference in AHA to salmon swimming out to sea, to the sea of public ownership and absentee ownership. Salmon being the entrepreneurs, the companies, and then they can't find their way home again. And once a company becomes owned by tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people and institutional investors all around the planet, obviously the pressures on the company are, I think, using the word, a world apart from, if we just take a small local farm as the exact opposite of that, right? So let me turn the thing around what you said. That's a bunch of generalities about corporate transparency and the difficulty, but turn it around and say, and I know you and I have discussed this many times, and you guys, the Real Organic Project, are fighting the good fight on organic standards, because when you have consumers that are buying products from people they don't know, you need to have some sort of standards so people can figure out, like, what are you really doing? How do I know you're doing it? Okay, way better than I do, because you're in the trenches of it every day, how complicated it is to have a third-party certification of that and have that tied into federal standards and all the rest of it. It's really hard, incredibly hard on all sides. It's like a very difficult thing to do. And the consumer gets to be the beneficiary because they get a stamp on something. And so they get to say, well, if I get a choice between this and that, I'll take that, because at least someone made an effort over there, right? But if you go all the way down to the local farmers market or local CSA, where, let's say, I should know this actually. I don't know how many of the organic growers that sell at the Boulder Farmers Market are certified, and how many aren't. I'll be with the guy who runs the farmers market this afternoon. I'll ask him. But it's interesting. He's one of my main partners in crime here in Boulder, and a wonderful guy. So why don't I know that number? That's actually interesting, because I don't feel like I need to know. I don't need to know the number. I go to the farmer's market. I know the farmers. I know him. I don't know everything, obviously, but I have a pretty good feel for what's happening at those farms. I get to, I do take the time to visit some of the farms and whatnot, which maybe is more than most consumers. But when you get to that level, the question of transparency is completely different. And then you really are talking about trust, actual trust between people who know each other. So that's how I see the range of issues. I guess I'm trying to say, I agree with you. As things grow, they become less transparent. And that's why working at the small local level, I think, is so radical and so radically important.
Do you think we can make a difference here at the small local level?
So that's actually how I kind of ended. I don't know if you had a chance to read the last installment of the book, but it ends on that. Like within the last page, it has a little hypothetical conversation with someone saying, how could you ever hope to create change like this? It's too small. It's too local. It's never going to scale. So my answer is that may be true. It may be too small, too inefficient. But it also may be true that that's the only way to actually get deep structural change. So if you hold those two thoughts in your mind, you might say, well, then we may never get deep structural change. And that is certainly a distinct possibility. It's also possible that these grassroots, small, trust-riddled, affection-riddled things that we're doing are the beginning of real structural change. And it's hard, you can't know where it's going to go. So I'll give us a somewhat more concrete answer than that. Like if slow money was successful, if the soil thing was, and I want to talk about I want to make sure we get to Bitcoin a little bit too, just for the fun of it, because they're tied together. If we were successful, how much change would we create? Like what metrics? Because look, things are urgent. Things are falling apart. There are wildfires. Democracy is under attack. I don't need to do the rest of the litany of all the things. So if you're going to engage in grassroots change, you want to have a feeling that's tied to something that, if it works, there will be some kind of impact, right? So I would just say it's been a challenge for me to answer that personally and professionally with the slow money movement. But I have come to an answer. The answer is we have to imagine the possibility that there will be hundreds of thousands of new small and mid-sized organic farms, possibly millions. I know it sounds completely delusional to anyone who's in the business, but in 1900, no one could have envisioned anything that we're doing now. Off the period, end of story. Couldn't have been imagined, good or bad. Couldn't have been imagined. So, and if you go back 25 years from now and you just think about some of the things we take for granted right now, including this phone that's sitting right here on this tripod, unimaginable, completely unimaginable. The challenge we face is that this phone is a sexy piece of technology that lets me play and do is very seductive and has lots of weird things to it that let's say just the pedestrian nature of being on a small farm and just working hard doesn't seem to have. And I've never said it this way before. I said, I think it's possible that the farming thing will become as sexy as the phone thing over the next 50 years.
We're sure trying.
I think, well, I mean, if you just think about what we're talking about, just where might we be and how might we value things? And so I think it's worth taking a shot at this thing. There could be another 500,000 farms or 1 million farms. There could be tens of millions of acres. There could be meaningful percentages of regional and local food grown in rings around 20 or 30 or 50 American cities in ways that we can't really imagine right now. It seems hard to imagine that, but I think it's worth imagining. And from my standpoint, I'd say I don't have to know that that's going to happen to think that it's a good thing to be supporting small farms near where I live.
Yeah, I actually don't think it's that crazy because there's so many young people that are really concerned about the environment. They go through all the education about it, and they come out thinking the food system is the way to create the most change. And a lot of them want to become farmers and give it a shot. But you and I have had a really interesting talk about what's happening with regenerative right now, and Cargill and General Mills and even Dannon and many of these big companies have really good people behind the programs that are trying to define regenerative, even give farmers credits and financial rewards for increasing carbon in the soil and all that stuff. And I'm curious, even with good people behind the programs at these large companies, are there examples of large companies doing good behind some of these programs, or are they just not to be trusted because there's all this self-interest involved?
They're all evil capitalist pigs. First I would say I have almost no direct experience with any of those people. So therefore I'm not qualified to actually opine in any realistic way about how valid let's say when General Mills says it's going to have 1 million regenerative acres by whatever, like, how real is that?
Sure, and it's also new. We're all trying to figure out what everybody means by it.
So I just want to be clear that I'm not. So I would never just take a pot shot at a company just because it's big and just because the chances of it falling short in this are great. I think it's good that everyone's trying to move in a new direction in some way. So, and like I said, because I haven't had direct contact with the individuals actually working in the programs, it wouldn't really be fair of me to just say something critical just for the fun of it. I would just go to the part where I'm focused. This is actually a perfect segue from the previous part of the conversation. I'd rather just focus on what I can control and what I do understand and what I know needs doing down the street. There's so much to be done there that, I don't have to try to solve, the big imponderable systems question. Just when you get to the thing of scale, I guess a couple of things. If we think about a farmer as a supplier of commodities for a corporate supply chain, and if you just want to add on to that a regenerative corporate supply chain, just for the fun, specifically what we're talking about. Okay, that's a thing that needs to happen. We want those supply chains to be as green as possible. What else are you going to say about it? So if you're a farmer who's farming 10,000 acres, or you have tens of thousands of head of dairy cattle that you're dealing with on that scale, you want to do it in as green a way as possible. Go for it, absolutely. But if we're thinking about farmers as providers of healthy food for the local community, or farmers as stewards of soil fertility, and these are real. We said the word intention earlier in the conversation. These are intentions. So if our intention as an economy is we can't fuck around with all that little stuff. We need to get milk at affordable prices on the shelf. We want organic milk to be in Walmart, and we want it to be cheap. That's a thing. It's not an either or choice. I mean, that's a thing that needs to happen. But that's not enough. We also have to build an entire wave. I'll just use the word, it's very charged at the moment, an army of farmers who are building soil fertility, putting carbon in the soil, going back to your smell aha that you had at the beginning of the podcast, creating diversity at the local level, creating these nodes of mutuality, affection, and trust at the local level. That also needs to happen. It's not either or. But I feel very strongly that if we just do the thing at the corporate level, we're going to collapse. You can't solve all these problems at the corporate level. You can do as well as you can, and that's what we should all be doing at the corporate level. You can solve the problems at the local level. The only question is whether you can do enough of it to move the needle. I mean, anybody who has gone to 63rd Street Farm in Boulder, or Black Cat Farm, or Aspen Moon Farm, or Cured Organics, or Red Wagon Farm, or the rest that I'm not mentioning, you cannot stand there and say, our country would not be better off if we had a whole lot more of them. Mm-hmm. It started at the county.
Yeah.
Our county would be better. So I just want to add one other kind of data point to when you're talking about corporations and large-scale regenerative stuff, I think it's useful to keep those numbers like this in mind. And because your family is running a 5-acre or whatever it is, a very small-scale organic farm. You're talking about businesses. On the one hand, it's a commodity business. If you're running thousands of acres, you're talking about generating something, $1,000 an acre in revenue, whatever the number is. This is just an order of magnitude thing. It doesn't have to have more precision than that. So you're growing something on thousands of acres of land that you can get $1,000 of revenue from. And you're on a small farm, you might be generating $20,000 of revenue per acre, if you're good. It's not easy, but people need to think about this. It's really obvious. Your farmers know this, but consumers or impact investors or others who are not directly involved in farming need to feel the difference of that as an enterprise. A few acres that have $20,000 an acre of diversity on it versus extensive acreage that has 1 or 2 crops on it that you get $1,000 or $2,000 or $500 depending on what the commodity is. That's what we're talking about. They're 2 completely different systems. So we want them both to be green. We want them both to have, the 900 million acres of farmland in the United States is not all going to be able to go to $20,000 an acre, labor-intensive, diversified thing. So there's always going to be hundreds of millions of acres that need to be as regenerative as possible at the industrial level. And what we're missing is the tens or hundreds of millions of acres of this other stuff. Right now we're not able to measure it in that scale. So that's where we're trying to. So I'm not really commenting on the big stuff. I'm sort of saying it exists. We need to do it as well as we can. But the focus for me needs to be on how do we get the other thing to happen in a much more robust way.
And for me, I would say the marketing has been so good and so strong from those massive industrial scale operations that it's taken market share away from the smaller farms that are really, upholding the true values of the triple bottom line and what the organic movement has always been. So if anything, that marketing has been so damaging to the small local farms because they do it better than we do, frankly.
Well,
they've got marketing people, right?
Yeah, of course. Well, so I'd like to kind of jump tracks here a little bit, go from farming to just impact investing, because it was slow money. It's about money, right? We're trying to change the way people are using their money. So the book Winners Take All came out maybe 2 years ago or so. I'm sure I'm going to butcher his name. Anand Giridharadas, I think is how he says it. Anyway, it's a very full-throated critique of impact investing and philanthropy. And it's a little bit his version on impact investing, and kind of would be a little bit if I was interviewing you and asked you to comment on X company and Y company and what their website says about this and that, and you would really go after them. So he did the same thing about impact investing. Basically, what he's saying is if you view capital as that in order to use capital to solve big problems, you have to do it at large scale. And it has to, you have to have good corporations to fight the bad corporations, let's say, just for the fun of it, just say it that way. And, the problems we're talking about transparency and scale and diversity and all these things, when you get big, even a good corporation is only so good by the nature of how it has to operate at that scale. My first book, I used a very simple metaphor of saying it's like putting biodiesel in a bulldozer, but not preventing the subdivision. It's like, okay, we got bulldozers. Do you want them running on leaded fuel, or do you want them running on biofuel? Well, we want them running on biofuel, but it'd be better if we weren't doing the subdivision. So it's there's a level of purity and idealism and activism where you just have to kind of decide where you're going to go in, and what you think might be possible. But I would come back to you and say, I don't think you as a small farmer need the marketing. You don't need the marketing department of General Mills. You need to be you, and you are you, and that's why you're able to grow and sell the food that you're selling into the local market. It'd be a little different if you said, this is the nut we're trying to crack with slow money a little bit. How do we as a community, how do we get above the CSA level, the individual farm thing, and how do we get a community to begin thinking like that? Yeah. About what we as a community want, how much we're willing to spend on it, however we spend it. That's both consumer, philanthropic dollars, loan dollars. It's all money. We're putting time and money into something, and to see if we can raise the level of awareness so that the way you're asking the question about greenwashing and marketing becomes kind of irrelevant at our level. At that level, as soon as you go into the other marketplace, I think what we're bouncing around in this conversation, there really are two different food systems. There's the corporate multinational food system, and then there's there's local food systems that have yet to really assert their true relevance in this world. The big one is there. We understand what that is. We see what some of the destructive impacts of it are. We're trying to minimize them, right? And we haven't yet fully affirmed as a society the importance of rebuilding the local food systems. It's happening a little bit because of CSAs and farmers markets and in a kind of an ad hoc way. And what we're talking about here today is, how do we not make it be so ad hoc? And look, you talk about the obvious thing. I mean, let's just say that. It's the obvious thing. Local food systems are a thing. They are radical. They are important. They're not the whole thing, but this other thing we're talking about is not going to survive, and the planet is not going to survive, and democracy is not going to survive, and the degree of climate mitigation is going to be so limited unless we are able to actually have local food systems be understood as a thing that in its own way is as important as the other thing. for some of the reasons are the same, some of the reasons are different. And we're still very early in that. So coming back to the impact investing thing, I'm going to say that's the piece that most impact investors don't have the patience for, if I use the word patient. It's too funky, it's too small, it's not going to scale, I can't make as much money at it. Correct. But it's really important. We got to find other ways of getting people's intention to see all the multiple values of that. And you and I have hardly talked about what they all are, because I think we may be assuming that most people who would be watching and listening to this know that, in terms of biodiversity and carbon and toxics in the environment and eutrophication of wells and depletion of aquifers and school lunches, and I don't know, I left out another 10 things. That's why it's so beautiful. I mean, local food touches on so many different root things that it's hard to measure all of them. It's hard to certify all of them. It's hard to market all of them to distant people, because, like, how would you do that? You can't. You have to do it at the local level where those things can all manifest themselves.
And yeah, we want to live in a different world.
Oh, that. Yeah. You should just say that. That's what I meant to say. What she said. We want olfactory diversity.
That's right. Well, thank you, Woody. I appreciate it. We could go on, I'm sure, and I hope we do, because I haven't read all the installments of AHA yet. And so once I do, let's get back together.
Yeah, I hope you will be able to at some point. I know you're busy preparing, and I really look forward to the event in January, and thank you for including me in any way in it. And I hope that some of the material that I've created can help us have some more of these conversations in the future. Obviously, I'd love to do anything I can to help make that happen in collaboration.
Same with what you're working on.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview, as well as the full transcript with links related to our conversation, is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 43. Please join us next time when our guest is my good friend Alan Lewis, who works in government and industry affairs at Natural Grocers. We have a little bit upsetting conversation about the effects of consolidation and what impact that has on the food products that actually make it to the shelf space in both large supermarkets and the smaller retail operations like the natural grocery stores and food cooperatives in your community. To find a Real Organic farm near you, visit realorganicproject.org/farms, and see you next time.